right, everyone. Welcome to the Crumbling podcast. It's a podcast about things that fell apart and also things that were glued together and some of the things that are in between.
I would argue it's about things that are currently falling apart too. It's not there's a lot of present tense and, horrifyingly enough, future tense. It's crumbled, crumbling, and will be crumbled. To be crumble. To crumble. What is the future tense?
I don't know. The English part of my brain broke.
Yeah, I'm just now realizing that I don't think you conjugate verbs like that, but that's fine. We are 10 seconds in and I have ruined the show. How's it going?
Things are going good. How are you guys?
I'm not doing great. I'm doing no cigarettes. I guess, I don't know. I haven't had a cigarette all year. And we are recording this on the 14th, 15th, something like 15th. That's a long time without a cigarette.
15 days. Yeah, I quit smoking last year. And it's fucking awful. Quitting cigarettes sucks.
Yeah. And here's the worst part is that I don't want to be alive that long. So there is actually very little incentive for me quitting other than just I have no money. That's really the biggest thing. But people are like, oh, you'll live longer. I don't wanna. You won't smell as bad. Nobody's coming near me either way. Who cares?
You want to talk about something else that might kill you?
Yes, we should introduce ourselves first, though. I think we skipped that part.
All right. Yeah, let's get some introductions.
I'm Andrew Hillary. I'm having a bad year.
I'm Sophia Florence, and I'm having a wonderfully neutral time.
And my name is Davin DuBois. I was formerly your AI co-host, but we figured out how to make me human.
Yeah,
or at least revert me back to my original form.
We did a Pinocchio scenario kind of deal, and it was like that. Here's the thing: it was that week between Christmas and New Year's, whenever time isn't real, anything is possible. We made an AI into a real human being named Davin DuBois, and that's our third co-host.
Hell yeah, he's a real boy now. It's beautiful.
We love to see it.
Anyway, today we are going to talk about climate change, and for the next few episodes about the disinformation around climate change kind of laid the groundwork to undo public trust in scientific establishments. And obviously there's a lot of fuckery by those establishments too, but the climate change one was deliberate. It started earlier than a lot of people realize.
I would say given that at the time of this recording, the entire state of California is on fire, I think it's a little rich that you're choosing now to talk about climate change. People are going through it. We don't have to make this political, okay? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I started working on this series for climate change sort of towards the middle of when we were working on the Gamergate series and around when we did the episode with Taylor Lorenz, and took some time out to do this. And the research has been wild. And just to introduce things, we need to talk about science as it is. And so I know you've all been given the definition of science as the scientific method since grade school, but let's refresh. Someone does experiments, those yield data. The experiments are repeated, the data is interpreted, and then that gets reported in a nice little paper. The papers get reviewed, and if experts trust what they see, the publications go further out into the world, ideally. Sometimes data gets forged. Sometimes the interpretations stretch the boundaries of meaning. Sometimes the data is kept locked up in institutions, and that's a dangerous game. The incentives of capitalism and state power can drive people to do this for one reason or another, and the consequences can be devastating. The trust in science is necessary for an informed populace, which is necessary for democracy, and democracy is necessary for science to work in return. Trust is kind of the name of the game, but trust can be eroded. So let's talk about one of the biggest instances where this is the case.
All right, before we get into it, I do just want to say that I appreciate your definition of science. And I think it's important to have, altering perspectives,
All right.
My definition of science is that it's a process somewhere between 40 and 80% of it is just pranking rats. So much of science is we gave this rat cocaine and then we hid the cocaine. What's the rat gonna do? Yeah. So, you don't want to forget pranking rodents is an important aspect, at least in my eyes. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah. You want to hear something slightly more depressing? When you have a drug product and not just a drug substance and you need to do testing, usually it's done instead of on rats, on beagles.
Beagles
in specific. Yeah.
They're giving the dogs cocaine.
They're turning the beagles gay.
Hell yeah. Give the dogs poppers. All right. We can talk about the serious things now.
We'll give the puppers some poppers.
Go to puppersforpoppers.com.
Oh my God.
That's the Patreon code. You could get it for free with code No, you can't.
Poppers for puppers.
So we're going to have to go way back to see when people started noticing climate change. And I mean, really far back. While there were some people who had posited some things earlier and made note that something like climate change based on the gas composition of Earth's atmosphere could affect things, it was 168 years ago in 1856 when the scientist Eunice Newton Foote showed experimentally that glass tubes full of gases of different compositions, as well as no gas at all, would retain heat differently. And yeah,
I'm sorry.
her last name is Foote. No, it's fine.
Nice to meet you. I'm Eunice Foote, and I've got some bad news about the future.
Yeah, she was a woman in science. She was an abolitionist, a women's rights activist, and a distant relative of Isaac Newton, hence, Eunice Newton Foote.
I'm sorry. Climate change has literally been DEI from the beginning.
She was also a prohibitionist because, every fave has to be a little problematic, but more in her research. The one tube that she found was impacted most by the heat of the sun in her experiments was the one holding carbonic acid gas, which was later identified to be carbon dioxide itself. Eunice thought it was noteworthy to mention this and said the following.
An atmosphere of the gas will give to our Earth a high temperature, and if, as some suppose, at one period of its history, the air had mixed with a larger proportion than at present, an increased temperature from its actions, as well as from the increased weight, must have necessarily resulted.
Thank you, Eunice.
Thank you, Carl from Jimmy Neutron.
You're welcome. Have you seen Jimmy's mom?
Yeah.
Is she the one that got junk in the trunk? What are we talking about?
I don't remember. No, Dexter's mom has the junk in the trunk.
I'm just doing word association at this point. No cigarettes makes me a fucking lunatic, okay? Also, I'm doing a little bit of Dennis Miller at the, okay? What is going on with me?
All right, so that paper was published in the American Journal of Science and Arts, but she didn't follow it up with any additional work, and the work went largely unnoticed until this century. I'm not sure if any of her work was downplayed because she was a woman, or if people just didn't see the significance, as they may not have been aware that the environment could have gradually increasing amounts of carbon dioxide. In 1896, Professor Svante Arrhenius, one of the founders of the field of physical chemistry, wrote a paper called On the Influence of Carbonic Acid in the Air Upon the Temperature of the Ground, which is a mouthful, in the London, Edinburgh, and Dublin Philosophical Magazine and Journal of Science. If you studied chemistry in college, you probably remember the Arrhenius equation, which explains temperature dependence on reaction rates. But if that means nothing to you, just know that this guy was a foundational figure in a lot of chemistry.
And I am part of the it means nothing to me contingent, so I appreciate you clearing that up.
Yeah, this was a big, important guy in chemistry. A lot of the rest of the sources I'm going to be using from here on are going to come from a website called Climate Files, which is a project of the Center for Climate Integrity. This is an environmental advocacy group who has built an archive of news and other documents, as well as having outright helped sue various arms of the oil and gas industry for their impacts in climate change. I wasn't aware of them prior to writing these episodes, but I will absolutely 100% be leaving their link in the show notes so that folks can donate to them and keep the great work moving. It's worth knowing that they've upset the folks over at Capital Research Center pretty badly, especially because their work was used to oppose immunity for oil companies from prosecution in issues related to climate change, which frankly fucking rules. If you're unfamiliar with the Capital Research Center, they're a conservative nonprofit that monitors other nonprofits, and they have historical ties to the Koch family, the Heritage Foundation, David Clark, Dennis Prager, Adam Carolla, and a lot of other modern day villains.
Capital Research Center is such a fucking ominous, yeah, anytime there's money involved, we're gonna look into it. I don't know. I guess it really does depend on the context, because as I'm saying that, I'm like, well, I guess the SEC is kind of the same thing in a way. But I was going to say they're doing it for a good cause, but, they're bought out entirely by the industry as well. So they're actually, in theory, the SEC is the good version of Capital Research Center.
Oh, the good version of Capital Research Center is Media Matters.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
What? It just sounds evil. Why do these? They're so on the nose. Why do they sound so evil? Stop sounding as evil.
Yeah. They're villain coded for sure.
Yeah. I mean, anybody that's got ties to Adam Carolla.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a pretty good barometer. If Adam Carolla's on your side, I feel like I'm out. Sorry.
Even his old co-host of The Man Show, Jimmy Kimmel, kind of a piece of
Jimbo
shit.
Jimbo Kimball.
What a dick. Union buster. Anyway, we're going to fast forward to the 1950s. So
Whoa!
Yeah.
Sorry, time travel always is a little jarring for me.
It's a big fast forward, but just know that like people started realizing that CO2 could warm up the atmosphere in the 1800s, but they didn't know how it would get there. Everybody was just like, oh, carbonic acid gas. It could warm up the atmosphere, but we don't have a lot of that around. So I uncovered an article from Kirk Johnson for the New York Times from September 29th, 2002, which I think kind of drives home the extent of how bad air pollution was in 1953. And before we dive into that, you all need to hear the title of this article, which I reiterate is from September 29th, 2002, just a year after.
Never forget.
Yeah, just a year after the thing that you should never forget, 9/11. And it's being written by a journalist based in New York. And the title was, You Should Have Seen the Air in 53, After September 11th, Considering History's Lessons on Pollution. And while a lot of this leg of the story will center around Los Angeles, New York was going through the same damn thing at the same damn time for the same damn reasons. This article's first 2 paragraphs go on to say,
a dry, wheezing, watery-eyed cough became common. The number of emergency room visits climbed, and theaters in Times Square went dark for lack of business. Smoke and haze drifted across the region. Lower Manhattan after September 11th? No. It was November 1953, in the middle of a 6-day siege of air pollution that fouled the region with a ferocity unimaginable by the standards of today's far cleaner air. Through one bad week, a stagnant stew of soot and lead and who knows what else killed or hastened the death of 25 or 30 New Yorkers per day, according to an analysis conducted years later. In another 2 paragraphs, it goes on to say, November 1953 was a very important moment, in part, and here's where the apt comparison to September 11th comes in, the experts say, because it illuminated in full fumbling glory how little science knew. Air researchers in those days were not even sure what to call the stuff that had descended on the city, let alone what health impact it had. They never tried the word smaze to describe the combination of smoke and haze, but it never caught on. Smog had more punch.
Crazy that they had to workshop the name for smog. I figured that was something, somebody was like, this, smoky fog. And like people just went with it. And they were like, oh, yes. Yeah, like smog was right there.
That works. See?
Smaze doesn't sound too bad. Like if you told me that this, like you were going to make me a piece of toast with a smear of smaze on it, I'd eat that toast.
I'd smear some schmaze.
Smear some schmaze. Look.
I schmaze it.
Can I schmaze it, girl? Smoke it and haze it. Can I schmaze it, girl? All right.
Yeah. So that totally blew my mind. I don't remember how I stumbled upon that article, but the air in 1953 was so bad that somebody a year after 9/11 was like, do you remember the time that the air was just as bad as when somebody flew a plane into a fucking building and it was just pollution?
I don't know if you know this, but Pittsburgh, where I live, allegedly, because it, the turn of the last century or whatever, this was like the number one place in the world that made steel. I actually don't know how accurate that is, but we had an insane amount of steel smelting facilities all in a very concentrated area. The air quality in Pittsburgh was so bad that people basically would just like kind of snow all year, but it was just soot. There was just so many of these forges, refineries, whatever the fuck you call them, that like people would come home from work just covered in soot. And so like Pittsburgh has in many older build Pittsburgh houses in the basement, there's just a shower in the middle of the room because like people would have to come in through the basement and shower all the soot off of them before they wanted to walk through the rest of the house. It's also why Pittsburgh has a bunch of toilets in the basement because people would be like, yeah, I'm covered in soot, but I got to take a shit, so I'm going to do that in the basement toilet. And yeah, so Pittsburgh, I wish I would have had the foresight to look up any actual information about this rather than going by hazy smazy memories I half remember. But Pittsburgh's air quality for a long time, like it would black out the sun because there was so much smoke and soot in the air. It's not like that anymore. It's fine.
That's incredible. I had no idea.
Yeah, because on 9/11 here, they flew planes into the refineries. Never forget. Okay.
I know children who didn't even know that was a thing. They were so young. It's just a history event to them. The kids I tutor, they were like, wait, what? I was like, yeah, that.
All right. So for a time, the oil companies didn't know and the air researchers didn't know. During 1953, the oil companies and the air researchers and all those guys didn't quite know that climate change was happening yet. But during that year, on November 23rd, a quote-unquote independent nonprofit corporation known as the Southern California Air Pollution Foundation was formed to study the smog in the LA area. And that seems harmless, right? Let's look at the board of directors. While there are less than a handful of academics from USC, UCLA, and CIT, 3 in total, the rest are from industry such as the following.
Harvey Mudd from the Cypress Mines Corporation, a company that was found by the nonprofit the Climate Accountability Institute to be responsible for about 0.1% of all global emissions prior to the year 2017. F. Marion Banks, president of the Southern California Gas Company. William C. Mullendorf, president of the Southern California Edison Company, which was a recipient of multiple lawsuits during the writing of this episode, claiming that its equipment was at least partially responsible for the Eaton fire in California, which has killed more than 20 people and displaced some thousands. So that's nice. Reese Taylor, the president of the Union Oil Company of California, now a wholly owned subsidiary of Chevron, which according to the Political Economy Research Institute at UMass Amherst, was responsible for 0.4% of greenhouse gas emissions in the year 2022 alone. F. Marlon Banks, the president of Southern California Gas Company. Representatives of Broadway Department Stores, Inc., Pacific Mutual Life Insurance Company, and our favorites, Bank of America. Because somebody's gotta crash the economy. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right? Hell yeah. And a notable name from the academic side, I'm gonna let Sophia say this one.
Fred D. Fagg Jr. I'm going to read that again. Fred D. Fagg Jr., the president of the foundation itself, and also the president of the University of Southern California at the time. The foundation funded some research by Caltech on carbon isotopes, air pollution, and process losses from the petroleum companies starting in winter 1954, with a roughly 90-page report coming out the following March. A postdoc named Chris Keeling did the research and included in it a warning which follows. The possible consequences of a changing concentration of the CO2 in the atmosphere with reference to climate, rates of photosynthesis, and rates of equilibration with the carbonate of the oceans may ultimately prove of considerable significance to civilization. And
it may.
It's not 100% blunt in what it's saying, but we're picking up what he's putting down.
Also in 1954, the American Petroleum Institute published a document in a journal called Air Repair, showing that they had been sponsoring some air pollution research, and the paper says therein. The purpose of this paper is to describe the pollution prevention activities of the petroleum industry, which have been regulated from recognition some 30 years ago by the executives constituting the management of its various units. That water and air pollution would become a very serious problem in certain portions of the nation unless well-planned actions were taken to prevent it. Sounds like they're on board, right?
Yeah.
Nope.
Fuck. God damn it.
You were wrong. They were not. Later in the article, we read, the worst thing that can happen in many instances is the hasty passage of a law or laws for the control of a given air pollution situation. For in many such cases, their passage results from a panicky feeling that there ought to be a law, and laws drawn from such reason are likely to be poorly drawn and based on either insufficient or erroneous data. That's the oil industry we know and love. ExxonMobil, baby.
We don't want to pass laws, because like if we pass laws, just because like people are like, they should pass a law. What are we doing? Then we're in a democracy. We're listening to the people. Wait. I'm sorry.
Listen, don't get hasty. You're in your panic. You're going to produce a law that may change something, but it could also hurt. More than likely, it'll change something, but there's a chance it could hurt something. Yeah. And we don't want to take that chance, right?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, I would much rather have the air that I'm currently breathing lit on fire than even risk a snowball's chance in hell that, there might be a law.
Yeah, of course. Who would want a law, especially against something bad? Not the American Petroleum Institute, of course.
Jimmy Carter. That motherfucker loved laws.
That motherfucker did Love laws. R.I.P. sort of Jimmy Carter critical support.
Jimmy Carter never returned my calls, so fuck him forever. I wanted him to look. I really just wanted him to donate his body to some kind of fucking marine conservation program, so that after his passing, he could have his bones become part of a habitat for manatees.
I will be honest, I didn't know who Jimmy Carter was until when I was younger, I did not know who Jimmy Carter was until I watched an episode of King of the Hill.
Oh, you saw the one where he helped Hank build the house for the Nietkos? Yeah.
But then I thought he was just an imaginary character.
Oh.
And then I was like, oh shit, this guy was a president.
Yeah. That's also fucking awesome.
I have a very weird eclectic knowledge of certain events and then a non-great understanding of other parts of history. Also, I have a prediction that I'm just going to get steadily more pissed off in this episode. Not this episode or this arc, because from what we've read so far, it feels like the right answers were laid out before the people in power and they just said, fuck it, and yeeted it into the mixed sun. And now we're being yeeted into the mixed sun.
Yes, you will get mad. You will get more mad.
I believe it.
You'll continue getting mad. We'll get there. So that article was very much focused on smog, but it shows that these guys were thinking about this, the air pollution. And the article does mention that they had put together the American Petroleum Institute's Committee on Smoke and Fumes of the Western Oil and Gas Association, which also a fucking mouthful, first called the Petroleum Industry Committee on Smog in 1946. After they couldn't identify the causes of smog, the Stanford Research Institute started to look into the issue, and the API ultimately didn't like that they were being blamed. The Stanford Research Institute claimed that the big issue was nitrogen oxides reacting with volatile organic compounds and creating ground-level ozone. And that explanation is still accepted today, and in the 1950s, the hypothesis was confirmed. However, in this paper, still in 1954, the API refused to believe the hypothesis, no matter how good the evidence was for it, and said that the volatile organic compounds, which we'll refer to as VOCs from here on in, and nitrogen oxides coming from the oil refineries was strictly coming from car exhausts. In reality, both contribute a lot. In 1954, the Air Pollution Foundation put someone who had a bit of a conscience as president, a chemical engineer, named Loren B. Hitchcock. According to his obituary in the New York Times from 1972, Hitchcock was primarily a consulting chemical engineer and had been a professor at SUNY Buffalo and University of Virginia. He was well respected and carried his graduate degrees from MIT. Probably the most shocking and simultaneously not shocking thing we'll put in this episode is a letter he wrote to the rest of the executive community of the Air Pollution Foundation regarding a lunch meeting with Philip S. Magruder, who was...
Magruder!
Yeah, wild fucking name.
Don't let me hold you up here. I just...
just had to say Magruder. No, I get it. It rolls off the tongue in a way that it requires guttural screaming. You just gotta... Magruder!
Phil Magruder.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta fill the Magruder in. Sorry. Magruder, I hardly knew her. So Phil Magruder at that time was the executive VP of General Petroleum, which eventually merged with Mobil Oil. He and other oil industry bigwigs spent the lunch meeting criticizing the research of the foundation, and despite being corrected about the conclusions of the data, decided to go a bit mask off. Hitchcock writes in his letter, Mr. Magruder, as chairman, introduced committee comment by questioning the advisability of the foundation, calling attention to these combustion products or publicizing them. George Dawson, VP of Standard Oil Company of California, said he understood that sulfur dioxide in the amounts presently emitted and found in our atmosphere were actually beneficial to plants and people. He endorsed Mr. Magruder's views and went on to criticize my speech at the State Chamber of Commerce air pollution meeting in San Francisco a month ago because I called attention to a growing Bay Area air pollution problem. Mr. William Stewart, VP of Union Oil Company, continued the criticism of the foundation, particularly along the lines that our policies indicated that we were attempting to cover too broad a program, and also that our research program seemed to be of a shotgun character instead of sticking to pinpoint research. He explained that he and others present had been part of the group which formed the foundation, and it was their understanding in diverting substantial funds to the foundation. The foundation would serve as the research department for the oil industry as well as other industries, that the foundation would publish findings that would be accepted as unbiased, whereas the oil industry's findings were not met with such acceptance. In short, he felt that WOGA did not want the foundation concerning itself with refinery stack gases, but just to stick to research.
Show note, sulfur dioxide is released in combustion of fossil fossil fuels and contributes to acid rain, breathing issues, and environmental issues. George Davidson was a douchebag, and sadly, we could not find where his grave is located so that you could potentially defecate on it. And for legal reasons, we're just kidding. But we also do have William Lynn Stewart's grave's address, and it will be available to Patreon subscribers. That means for the low price of $3 a month, you can hear exclusive episodes, hear everything 1 week early, and find the hottest gender-neutral restroom in California. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/the Crumbling Podcast and sign up. And again, for legal reasons, we just think it's funny to shit on a grave. Is that how? Does that count as saying parody? Whatever. Go shit on this guy's grave, or don't.
For legal reasons, don't shit on his grave. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
But also, this is not a podcast note. This is an Andrew Hillary note. It is the bathroom is a BYOTP. There is no toilet paper there. If you're gonna be wiping, you gotta bring a wiper.
That is true.
I always have a small pack of baby wipes in my cargo pockets whenever I wear cargo shorts, so I'm cool. I'm prepared for anything. I've shit in the woods before, and I'll do it on a grave. I'm not scared.
I'm fucking glad cargo
I have a
pants
portable
are coming
bidet.
back.
I'm sorry, did you say you have a portable bidet?
Yeah.
Is that just a water bottle?
No, it's
it's
like a external douche. I know about these.
That's a water
I found
bottle.
one recently. I will not describe why.
You know the funny thing? This was a bit. I didn't know those were actual things.
Oh, really?
Now curiosity's taking over.
Now you know. All right, we could talk about the portable bidets later.
And we will.
Yeah.
And we will. Yes, that's what we're talking about on our Crumbs episode this week. So subscribe to our fucking Patreon. Anyway, we're going to bring in someone who is somehow one of the better people in this story, despite not being a great person in every other area of his life. Dr. Edward Teller. Teller was a Hungarian-American physicist, a chemical engineer, and notably one of the people involved with the Manhattan Project, which produced the first atomic bomb, and went on to be one of the people involved with the Star Wars project during the Reagan era, and also helped Israel develop nuclear weapons capabilities. So saying he's a complicated figure would be a really light way to describe him, and sadly, he's not someone we'll dwell on much, but he made two very important talks, which drastically upset the petroleum industry, because despite the fact that he got involved in some monstrous shit, he was also very aware early on that anthropogenic climate change was being caused by fossil fuels. In 1957, he stood before the American Chemical Society, which is the professional society for chemists in America, and warned them about the increasing amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, coming primarily from burning fossil fuels, which would raise the temperature at the surface of the Earth. He also mentioned that this came with a chance that some of the polar ice caps would melt. He wasn't being coy at all, and this was clearly life or death to him. In October 1959, an employee of the Shell International Chemical Company named Dr. M.A. Matthews published an article called The Earth's Carbon Cycle, which was featured in the publication The New Scientists, which still exists today, and is a weekly pop science publication that's now owned by the Daily Mail. Fuck those guys. In Matthews' article, he tried to rebut Teller's address to the American Chemical Society. His argument hinges on the existence of carbon cycles where carbon dioxide is used by plants and taken up by calcium carbonate in the ocean to form calcium bicarbonate. And he goes on to say that there's newly discovered deposits of oil in Venezuela at the time, which he conclude indicate that nature is actually converting the carbon dioxide back into long-chain hydrocarbons, and therefore no harm, no foul. Or perhaps, even if our actions did have any contribution, that it was very minimal compared to the natural carbon cycle. In other words, his paper was bullshit.
Well, look, the important thing is that if you're able to find somebody who says the thing that you're doing isn't actually that bad, then that's kind of worth all the money in the world. So
it is. Yeah, you can just pay experts to say whatever the fuck you want.
It's a really weird thing where experts are willing to sell their soul to say bullshit, especially when they know it's of substantial consequence. And I don't know what that says about human nature or capitalist hellhole we're in, but it says something.
What I always find interesting is that many times people that are taking the antagonistic position towards climate change, many times they will say that a lot of climate research is done because climate scientists are getting payouts. It's the oldest fucking trick in the book, accuse the other person of what you're doing. But for them to specifically be like, oh, the climate scientists that say climate change is real, they're just doing that to get money. It's like, dog, you're literally paying scientists to just be like, no, science isn't real. Like,
yeah, it's crazy. Like if you are actually somebody who is like in doubt about climate change and like can't figure it out, like you can go to the NOAA and other agencies, and they literally have the air temperature data. Like you can just get it and graph it on Excel. It's they're big fucking data sets, but like if you are handy with Python or Excel, like you could just go get that data set and graph it and look at the fucking temperature rise for yourself. Like it's just there. It's kind of silly to try to like pretend that it's not happening.
I'm going to go one further because like the average person, you give them a bunch of data, they're like, what? I'm going to put this one out there. This is how I've always kind of thought about it. Like, you know, one of the things that makes it hard to believe in climate change for a lot of people is just that, like, the world is so big. How could we really do anything to change it? So I like to think about this. Imagine an Olympic-sized swimming pool, right? Get a dropper of sulfuric acid, put one drop in that pool today. You're going to jump in that pool. It's going to be fine, right? What if you put one drop in that pool every day for 100 years? You still want to jump in that water? Huh? Little bits can change big things over time, dog. Just there's nothing else to fucking say about it. We've been pumping out a specific chemical into the air for 150 years, and like it changes the air. It changes the atmosphere slowly and surely. Calm down. Read a book. No, listen to this podcast.
Yes, listen to the podcast and also check out Climate Notes because they're great. You know, you could do the same one with piss instead of the sulfuric acid. You could just say, hey, like, sure, I'd go swimming in the pool that was an Olympic-sized pool and like one person peed in it, but if 1,000 people peed in it, I'd be like, well, that's just piss at this point.
How hot are the people? Because I might not be. Never mind. You know what? We don't have time for this. Let's keep the podcast moving.
Amazing. Pee is stored in the balls. No, that's disinformation. Pee is not stored in the balls. If you're listening to this podcast and you've never heard of a rhetorical technique called the Gish Gallop, which was usually used in debates, where a person makes a very long series of arguments to overwhelm someone else with no concern for if the arguments are sound or even based on good evidence, this is exactly what that paper is. It was at the time...
Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro. It was at the time and still is very easy for people who work at large companies to fund research papers or even commentary papers on science with very little pushback. And anyway, that same year, Edward Teller, critical support in this moment in history, but also may he rot in hell, showed up to a symposium organized by the American Petroleum Institute and the Columbia School of Business, which was to mark the 100-year anniversary of the American Petroleum Institute. And Teller proceeded to tell these bastards where to stuff it. Parts of the transcript can be pulled from an article in The Guardian from 2018, reading,
At present, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen 2% over normal. By 1970, it will perhaps 4%. By 1980, 8%. By 1990, 16%, about 360 parts per million by Teller's accounting. If we keep up with our exponential rise in the use of purely conventional fuels, by the time there will be serious additional impediment for the radiation leaving the Earth, our planet will get a little warmer. It is hard to say whether it'll be 2 degrees Fahrenheit or only 1 or 5. But when the temperature does rise by a few degrees over the whole globe, there is a possibility that the ice caps will start melting and the level of the oceans will begin to rise. Well, I don't know whether they will cover the Empire State Building or not, but anyone can calculate it by looking at the map and knowing the ice caps over Greenland and over Antarctica are perhaps 5,000 feet thick.
dummy thick.
I've actually been to Antarctica. That ice, it's like 2 or 3 inches. Like you could see the rocks underneath. There's like almost no ice down there. It's just like, it looks like a lot, but like when you get up there, it's like, yeah, like this could be like enough ice for like 2, maybe 3 middle of summer barbecues. You know, like you're chopping it up, you're throwing it in the tub, you're putting the Coca-Colas in there, you're putting the Coors Lights and the Miller Lights into the tub, and you run out of ice. It just melts so quick. You gotta get more ice.
Did you say Coca-Cola? Don't you mean pop? A nice pop?
Pop.
Okay, I do say pop, but also when I say Coca-Cola, I'm referring to the type of pop known as Coca-Cola. What do you...
I didn't know you said pop.
Yeah, but Coca-Cola, I'm specifically saying Coca-Cola. Like, I didn't even say...
It's all pop.
Cola. No, what? Pop is the general term. Coca-Cola is the specific term. I was using this... What is happening right now?
Nope. It's black pop, white pop, orange pop, generic orange pop, generic white pop.
What is this, like drink?
Pop?
I grew up on purple drink and shit. I don't know.
I drank tap water. Fuck
I
you.
also drink tap water.
I drink out the hose. I'm pretty sure medical ailments may have come from there.
I like the idea of somebody that only drinks out of the hose. Like you go to a restaurant, like would you like a sparkling or still water? And you're like, do you got a hose in the back?
They got a little rust on it too.
Yeah, it builds the fortitude.
Zoomers who are listening, there used to be a time where we just drank things out the hose.
Yeah, the 90s were fucking wild.
They need to bring back hoses, honestly.
They need to bring back the game Parasite Eve.
What?
Yeah,
I'm not going to disagree
we're not going to talk about the 90s. But I hope that like triggered a memory for somebody, and they're like, "Is that the video game where I had to stop the monster lady from stealing all the cum?" And yes, it is. It is. You got to stop her from stealing all the cum. Anyway, do you guys have anything that you want to promote, to plug, now that we are done with our first episode on climate change? And we're still in the fucking 1950s. We stayed in the 1950s for the whole fucking episode.
First of all, make America great again. This is exactly where I want to be. Second of all, no, I kind of ran out of steam after that one. It's just so infuriating to be like, okay, like we've kind of like, you look back at things that people were doing in present context, they seem so much more evil. But like with this and with everything, it's like, man, people knew how fucking vile and evil they were being at the time. They just like made mental justifications for it, just like they do now. Like, people were like, oh, you can't judge those in history. Like it was different times. And it's like, yeah, but like greed and like disregard for future generations and disrespect for the humanity of people of lower classes than you, like that has always been the same thing. Like, even if it wasn't as informed, they were like, oh shit, we just got word that all the shit we're pumping out into the air might be bad. And it's like, yeah, but if we do anything about it, we're going to like make less money.
Yep. That's the big key difference between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is coming from the source of the big lie, and misinformation is coming from people who believe it. But no, some of these rich bastards like actively were doing disinformation about climate change before most of the public knew about it. Like when I was a kid, I thought that climate change was something that people started learning about in the 70s. Honestly, like I didn't know how early that research was until I started writing this episode, and it broke me a little. I craved a cigarette. I didn't smoke one.
Me too.
But I craved one.
I craved at least 3.
Nice.
I will say, I do have a plan that even if I'm, done smoking, I will always carry a pack of cigarettes with me if I fly, because like it's always been in my head. It's like, man, if this plane's going down, I'm lighting up a cigarette. I've always wanted to smoke a cigarette on a plane.
Hell
God,
yeah.
that must have been so fucking legit.
Yeah,
I smoked a
fair.
cigarette in a mall once.
Nice.
In the Czech Republic. All right. I don't have anything. Listen to the worst week yet. That's all I got. Patreon.com/the Crumbling Podcast. Go over there. Listen to me talk about 9/11 probably. And mind-free corny shit. Everything is happening on the Patreon. Patreon.com/the Crumbling Podcast is the everything app.
Only thing I'm going to plug is our Patreon, the best Patreon. Patreon.com/the Crumbling. Also, if you're able to, after
it's
you
the Crumbling
subscribe to our
Podcast.
Patreon, I was actually trying to find it in like the show notes. Subscribe to our Patreon. We said it 15 fucking times during this episode, and y'all motherfuckers got time to like type in multiple URLs. One's gonna work. Also, if you have the means, please donate to the people out in LA. They need our help because fucking climate change.
Yeah.
Again, people are currently on fire. I think it's kind of fucked up of you to bring politics into this. I said it before. I'll say it again.
Politics wouldn't be here if DEI wasn't a thing. I died a little inside saying that sentence.
But you were right. You were right.
I'm gonna have a rant for the Crumbs, the weekly Davin DuBois rant.
Davin DuBois.
All right, y'all.
No relation to Tom.
We're going to let everybody go, and we're going to go over to Crumbs and, rock over London, rock over Pittsburgh. Heinz, it's America's ketchup.
It's the world's ketchup. Fuck that shit.
Goes good on steak.